My name is Claire Morgan, 34 years old. The night everything shifted, my parents were celebrating 35 years of marriage in a restaurant where the napkins were folded like origami swans, and the wine list needed its own table of contents. The whole extended family had squeezed around two long tables pushed together. Everyone was a little overdressed, a little overloud, and more than a little overserved. Adrian wasn't there. He'd been invited technically, but the way my mother had said, if he's not too busy, made it clear she didn't really consider him part of the family. When his product launch got delayed and he texted that he had to work late, I told him not to worry about it. It's probably for the best, he wrote back. At the time, I thought he meant the stress. Later, I realized he meant the people. They started the way they always did, soft, pointless chatter, old neighbor gossip, which cousin had let themselves go, whose second marriage had quietly fallen apart, the kind of conversational junk food this family could live on for hours. But as the night went on and the bottles emptied, the air sharpened. My mom got that look she gets when wine turns into truth serum, a little too bright in the eyes, lips just a bit too loose. Michelle, my older sister, was already on her second martini, laughing just a shade too loudly at her own stories. At one point, a server hesitated at the edge of the table, tray of champagne flutes in hand, as if he could feel the tension rising, and wasn't sure if pouring more was a good idea. People tried to steer the conversation away from the cliff. My uncle launched into a story about his vacation in Arizona. One of my cousins mentioned a recent promotion. But no one can outtalk Michelle once she gets going, and no one has ever successfully redirected my mother once she fixes on a target. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. You see it coming, you know exactly how it ends, and you still can't look away. Michelle was in the middle of bragging about a merger her law firm had just closed. She sprinkled partner names and client companies like confetti, emphasizing the ones she knew our parents recognized from the news. She didn't say she was gunning for partner, but the implication hung there like perfume. I'm just so proud of her, my mother cut in, voice a little too loud, a little too sharp. Michelle has always been disciplined, always focused. I knew she'd go far. She lifted her glass as if she were offering a toast, scanning the table for backup. My father nodded dutifully. An aunt murmured, "Of course." A few cousins gave polite smiles. Then my mother turned to me. "You'll never be as successful as your sister," she said. Just like that, casual, final, as if she were commenting on the weather. I felt a small shift around the table, the way shoulders tensed, the way eyes dropped to plates. One cousin mouthed Jesus to his wife. My aunt shifted in her seat and glanced at me with a tight expression like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. Even Michelle's face flickered. For half a second, surprise cracked her practiced expression. Then she smiled into her glass, sipping like this was the line she'd been waiting for all night. Nobody laughed. Not one person. I took a sip of my drink. I didn't flinch. I didn't fire back immediately. I just let the silence swell until you could practically hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that I had stopped chasing their approval years ago. Not because I didn't want it, but because wanting it was killing me. I was always the quiet one, not the headline maker, not the one whose job title sounded impressive at cocktail parties. While Michelle was racking up awards and LinkedIn announcements, I was building something less flashy and more real. I studied, worked, learned to navigate the tech world without a safety net. I taught myself to see trends before they hit. I made mistakes, paid for them myself, and fixed them. I didn't buy a flashy car. I reinvested. I didn't beg for validation. I built leverage. And the one person at that table who knew almost nothing about what I was doing was also the only one I considered worth my time. Ryan, our youngest brother. He sat near the far end of the table, half in shadow, his wife beside him, their toddler daughter asleep in a stroller between them. No one was asking him about his work. No one was bragging about his progress. They never did. His ideas didn't fit the script. To them, Ryan was the dreamer, the guy with the crazy startup ideas, the sleepless nights, the chaotic schedule, the one who never settled down into something solid, the one they spoke about with a mix of pity and condescension. But I saw something else. I saw the bigger picture. I saw the way he could break down a messy process into something simple and elegant. I saw how he listened to small business owners talk about their daily headaches and then sketched out solutions on napkins. I saw his wife working extra shifts while he coded until 3 in the morning because they both believed there was something worth building. So when he needed help, real help, not advice or judgment, I was the one who stepped up. I paid for his first developer so he could move beyond duct tape prototypes. I covered part of their rent the month their daughter was born, and a client backed out at the last minute. I spent late nights on Zoom editing his pitch deck, walking him through how investors think, how to tell a story with numbers. I helped him streamline his back-end systems so he could actually ship instead of constantly patching. Quietly, without receipts, without telling anyone. Because I knew what it felt like to have no one believe in you. My mother sat there, tipsy and smug, offering her passive-aggressive benedictions. Michelle grinned like she'd won a trophy. My father stared into his empty wine glass, pretending not to hear the crack echoing through the family mythology. And I realized something. They hadn't changed at all. But I had. I didn't owe them explanations anymore. The next words out of my mouth weren't revenge. They weren't spite. They were clarity. I set my glass down on the table, the click louder than it should have been. Good, I said calmly, because I'm too busy funding his lifestyle. I tilted my head slightly toward Ryan. He didn't move, didn't speak. But I saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the sharp inhale, the way his wife's hand slid into his under the table. Their daughter shifted in her stroller, still blissfully asleep. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the sound left the room in a rush. Michelle stopped smiling. Her face went white, then flushed blotchy red. My mother blinked, confused, as if she couldn't quite process the words. My father's shoulders stiffened. He stared at a water ring on the table, suddenly fascinated by condensation. No one spoke, not even Ryan. I didn't explain. I didn't spell out the late nights, the invoices I paid, the office space I'd quietly covered when his landlord threatened to evict him. I didn't talk about revenue numbers or early investors or the app that had finally started pulling in real money. I just let the truth sit there, heavy and undeniable. They had spent years talking, laughing, mocking, telling me who I wasn't, while I had been building quietly on my own terms. I stood up, smoothed my dress, left the gift bag I'd brought, a hand-carved photo frame from a local artisan, engraved with their names and anniversary date, next to the half-empty wine bottle. I've got an early morning, I said to no one in particular, and I walked out. No speech, no guilt, no pretending. That was the last time I gave them anything they didn't earn. I didn't pay for the catering, though I'd originally offered. I didn't answer when the florist called the next day asking for a deposit like last time. I didn't respond to the photographer who emailed me proofs out of habit. They figured it out on their own, eventually. Later that night, as I sat on my couch with my laptop open, reviewing a proposal for a logistics app, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. You really didn't have to storm off like that. It was just a joke. Anyway, the caterer says, we're over the guest limit and trying to charge extra. Can you handle it? No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a reference to what she said, like it was light teasing between friends, followed by a request for money. I looked at the screen for a long second. Then I put the phone face down and didn't reply. The messages kept coming, like someone tapping on a locked door and pretending not to notice the deadbolt. The next morning, Michelle fired one off. Seriously immature. Grow up. No context, no hello, no reflection. Just a sentence tossed like a grenade she assumed would blow up in my hands. I blocked her number without a second thought. My dad left 3 voicemails between 9 and 11. The first was a halting half-apology wrapped in excuses. You know how your mother gets when she's tired. She had a bit too much to drink. She didn't mean anything by it. The second ignored the night entirely and dove straight into logistics. He couldn't figure out how to access the shared Google Drive where I'd stored family documents. Could I walk him through it again? The third was just a long pause, a sigh, and then the soft click of a hang-up. I didn't listen to any more after that. What none of them seemed to grasp was that this wasn't about an anniversary dinner or one cutting line. It was about years of being the invisible scaffolding, holding up a structure they never even acknowledged I was part of. They laughed at me, leaned on me, minimized me, then acted surprised when the scaffolding finally stepped away. The difference was, I wasn't doing this from rage anymore. I wasn't trying to prove them wrong or win some imaginary argument. I had nothing left to defend. I had simply stopped. Stopped replying, stopped fixing, stopped filling in gaps with my time and money and patience. Meanwhile, life moved forward. Monday morning, I was on a call with a developer I was onboarding from Argentina, walking him through our codebase, answering his questions about edge cases and the logistics platform I'd been quietly prototyping for 6 months. By lunch, I was in a meeting with an angel investor who'd seen an early version of our app and wanted to talk terms. We sat in a glass-walled conference room downtown, him in a perfectly tailored blazer, me in the same black blazer I'd had for years, laptop open, pitch deck on the screen. "So you built this on your own?" he asked. "Mostly," I said. "Back end is mine. Front end is a contractor. UX is a work in progress." He nodded approvingly. "You move fast." I smiled, quietly. By Thursday, I'd finalized a contract on a small commercial space downtown, half brick, half glass, nothing flashy, but with good bones. A partner and I were going to flip it into a co-working hub for small logistics and retail outfits. He respected my input, didn't talk over me, and never once implied I should be grateful to be included. At night, when my brain finally needed to shut down, Adrian would come over with takeout. He'd kick off his shoes, open a bottle of wine, and listen as I told him about investor calls and dev stand-ups, and how strange it felt to sleep without my phone buzzing every few minutes. He told me stories about his ex, Chloe, the way she'd maxed out his credit card on self-care, and then accused him of not believing in her creative potential when he asked about the charges. How he'd spent years thinking that kind of behavior was normal if you love someone. How therapy had taught him that love didn't mean total financial vulnerability to someone else's irresponsibility. "You kept them safe for so long," he said one night, rinsing dishes in my sink while I leaned in the doorway. "Your family, with money, with your time, with your silence. They mistake that for weakness, but it's actually the opposite." "Doesn't feel like it," I said. "That's kind of the point," he replied. "It's easy to confuse exhaustion with weakness when you've been carrying people for years." Back at my parents' house, things weren't going so smoothly. I heard from my cousin Allison, one of the only 2 relatives I still talk to, that the caterer's final invoice was nearly double what my parents expected. They'd gone over the guest limit, and the company was charging them for the additional plates. The florist had assessed a rush fee for last-minute changes Michelle insisted on. The event planner refused to release final photos until her deposit was cleared. "And for once," Allison said over coffee, everyone looked at each other like, "Who's handling this?" and realized the answer wasn't obviously you. "Let them figure it out," I said, stirring my drink. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. "They're very capable when it benefits them." Apparently, Michelle tried to step into the role she assumed she'd always had, a natural leader, the one in charge. She made calls, sent emails, tried to throw her job title around as leverage. It didn't work. Vendors don't care about prestigious law firms. They care about paid invoices. When she hit a wall, she did what she always does, went down the hierarchy. She called Ryan. He told me about it later, how she hadn't called to apologize or ask about his app or even his kid. How she'd opened with, "You need to help me get in touch with Claire. She's being dramatic, and I just need this one thing." How he'd listened for a few seconds and then, for the first time in his life, told her no. "I thought she was going to crawl through the phone," he said, half laughing, half stunned. "She said I was choosing sides. I told her I already had." That was when the tone shifted. Another message from my mother landed on my phone a day later. "No demands this time. No jokes. We don't want to fight. Can we just talk?" The thing about people who've never truly listened to you is that when they suddenly say they want to talk, they don't mean talk. They mean reset. They mean let's pretend it didn't happen and go back to playing your role. I didn't answer. The family group chat, which had been a steady drip of passive-aggressive memes and pray for your siblings posts, started to get weird. Old photos of me and Michelle as kids, Bible verses about forgiveness and unity, my mom posting a cookie recipe like none of it had ever happened. That's when I knew they were getting desperate. When people who've ignored you for years suddenly start acting like everything is fine, it isn't an olive branch, it's bait. I stopped checking the group entirely. And while they were busy pretending nothing was wrong, something inside me finally exhaled. I was sleeping better than I had in years. The constant hum of anxiety I thought was just part of my personality quieted. I could hear my own thoughts again. Work became clean. That's the only word I have for it. Clean and sharp. Tasks got done without me having to pause and decipher some emotionally loaded text from my mother or triage another financial crisis she'd caused. Ryan and I had 2 new investors circling. The app we'd launched was gaining traction with small business owners in 2 metro areas. Nothing viral, nothing dramatic, just steady, reliable growth. Exactly the kind of progress I'd always believed in. His wife texted me a photo of their daughter, sitting on the floor with a plastic laptop, tiny fingers hammering at the keys. The caption read, "She says she's working with Aunt Claire." I stared at that picture longer than I meant to. On a Friday afternoon, just after 3, my phone buzzed. "You home?" Ryan. "Yeah, why?" "Be there in 10. He didn't knock timidly. He knocked like someone who had decided that whatever was in his hand needed to be in mine immediately. When I opened the door, he stood there with a manila folder clutched in both hands. No jokes, no small talk. Just that tight, focused look I'd seen before on his face when a build crashed an hour before a demo. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I said. He sat at my kitchen table, laid the folder between us, and slid it across like it might explode. "I found something," he said, "and I think you need to see it." I opened the flap. Inside were 3 printed email threads and a formal-looking document from an investment firm I didn't recognize. All of them had one thing in common. My name. Not just mentioned. Listed. "Claire," Ryan said quietly. "I think Mom and Michelle have been using you for more than catering money." I read the first email, then the second, then the document. My heart rate didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. It was worse than that. Everything inside me went very, very still. Because this wasn't just about insults or unpaid favors anymore. They hadn't just disrespected me. They'd gambled with my identity. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the papers before the words stopped blurring. The first email was from a representative at a boutique investment firm in Florida, thanking the partners, Michelle and me, for their interest in a private property flip near Sarasota. I reread the line with my name on it 3 times. The second email was worse. It was Michelle confidently reassuring the firm that Claire is fully on board and that I had the liquidity to cover any temporary gaps. The phrasing made my stomach twist. Liquidity. She didn't guess that number. Someone either told her, or she'd been watching me more closely than I realized. But the third email took the air clean out of my lungs. It was from my mother. A casual 2-paragraph note sent months ago, confirming that I had agreed over dinner last spring to support Michelle's venture as an informal, silent partner. There had been no such dinner, no such conversation, no such agreement. My mother hadn't just lied. She had lied in writing, on my behalf, with my name attached to a financial contract. Identity misuse, fraud, liability, exposure, all of it wrapped into something they assumed I'd never know about because, in their minds, I was too quiet to question anything. I flipped through the documents again, slower. The contract hadn't legally bound me, not fully. Michelle hadn't forged my signature. She wasn't that careless. But she'd created enough of a paper trail to make it look like I'd given verbal consent. Verbal consent that, in financial law, can get very messy. "They used me," I said finally, my voice sounding far away. Ryan nodded. "And not by accident. They clearly thought you'd never challenge it." He wasn't even angry. He looked tired, like he was watching his own childhood finally unravel in front of him. "How did you find this?" "I wasn't looking," he said. "I was helping a former colleague vet some investment pitches. Your name popped up in a flagged report. I thought it was weird, so I dug deeper." He took a breath. And then I realized what I was looking at. I stared down at my own name on the contract. It felt surreal. Like seeing myself in someone else's story, someone careless, someone reckless, someone who would throw thousands of dollars into a hurricane-zone real estate flip with strangers. But it was them, Michelle, overconfident, endlessly praised Michelle, taking out a private loan she couldn't afford, risking other people's money, assuming mine was available. And my mother, complicit, dismissive, calculating, co-signing the fantasy with a single sentence. Claire agreed. Claire will support it. Claire will pay. A familiar heaviness pooled in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. I had been the crisis manager, the fixer, the quiet safety net. They thought I would always be the cleanup crew for their messes, that my silence meant permission. But silence is not consent. And this time silence was over. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat at my desk long after midnight, the documents spread out like shattered glass. I kept hearing my mother's voice from that dinner. "You'll never be as successful as your sister." And I thought, you don't even know who I am. Around 2 a.m, I opened my laptop, logged into my legal services account, and created a new case file. I uploaded every document Ryan had given me, Then I sent them to a business lawyer I'd hired once before in a licensing dispute. He replied 20 minutes later, "This is identity fraud. Let's talk Monday." No softening, no hedging, just direct. It struck me then that the people who had been most dangerous to me were the ones who expected my silence the most. When Monday arrived, I walked into the lawyer's office with a calmness so unnerving it felt like another person had slipped into my skin. He greeted me, gestured to the documents on his desk, and didn't waste time. "This isn't small," he said. "Your mother and sister misrepresented your involvement in a financial agreement. That constitutes fraud and identity misuse. If that Florida property goes under, and based on the numbers here, it will, you could have been dragged into liability." "So what do we do?" I asked. "We move fast," he said. And we did. Within 48 hours, we sent formal, icy letters to Michelle, my mother, and the investment firm outlining fraudulent misrepresentation, unauthorized use of my name, potential financial liability, demand for immediate correction, and a clear warning that failure to comply would result in a lawsuit. There were no threats, no emotion, just sharp, clean facts arranged with surgical precision. I expected panic. I expected calls, tears, begging. Instead, Michelle's attorney responded with a sterile 3-paragraph statement claiming this was all a misunderstanding and that I had verbally expressed support. They tried to muddy the waters by painting Ryan as having misinterpreted the documents. Gaslighting through legalese. They wanted to confuse the truth just enough to avoid consequences, just enough to make me doubt myself. They didn't understand that I wasn't the same quiet girl they could talk circles around anymore. My lawyer sent one final letter, setting a clear deadline. Remove my name from every document within 5 business days or face litigation and damages. The investment firm responded first. "We apologize for any confusion," their email read. "The misunderstanding has been corrected." Their tone made it clear they had no interest in being in the middle of a family war. The amended filings hit my inbox before the end of the week. Michelle's deal collapsed 2 days after that. Her personal loan, reliant on timelines she fabricated, defaulted. The Florida condo they bought too close to hurricane season was underwater both financially and literally. One partner pulled out immediately. The other threatened to sue her. Her savings evaporated into legal fees and emergency retainers. She didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't apologize. She didn't even rage. Silence, which coming from her was louder than any explosion. My mother didn't call either. But something else did arrive. A link from Ryan. "Thought you should see this," he wrote. Attached was a screenshot of an email my mother had written to a church board she was part of. A glowing recommendation letter from Michelle. Words like ethics, integrity, unwavering loyalty. 2 days after receiving a cease and desist for identity fraud, she submitted this letter like it erased truth. That was the moment something in me settled. Not anger, not grief, just clarity. They hadn't just lied. They had chosen the lie over me. And once someone does that, there is no coming back. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread faster than even I expected. It didn't explode, it unraveled, quietly, inevitably, like a sweater tugged by a single loose thread. Once the amended filings were submitted and my name was officially removed, Michelle's partners panicked. The illusion of stability she'd projected, her confidence, her connections, her carefully curated success, evaporated the moment someone competent actually read the numbers. One partner emailed a terse, 3-sentence withdrawal. The other retained counsel and threatened legal action for misrepresentation. By the end of the week, the boutique investment firm flagged her loan. They'd only approved it because she'd implied they had 3 stable contributors to the project. With 2 gone, and the third never having truly existed, it triggered a review. When they realized Michelle had misrepresented both her team and her resources, the loan terms tightened like a noose. The Florida property was already a problem. She hadn't checked seasonal flood patterns, hadn't researched zoning changes, hadn't even seen the place in person. It was a bad bet disguised as ambition. Without my name propping up the fantasy, everything collapsed. And for the first time in her life, Michelle had to carry the weight of her own decisions. Her personal savings evaporated into legal consultations, emergency property management fees, and penalties. The promotion she'd been angling for at her law firm, her entire personality for the last 18 months, was suddenly under review. Not because I told anyone, but because when a lawyer is involved in a financial misrepresentation dispute, it becomes discoverable. Ethics boards don't look kindly on that. She tried to manage the narrative the only way she knew how, with charm and spin. She told coworkers and extended family that I'd overreacted, that Ryan had manipulated me, that we were both jealous, that she was the real victim because all siblings borrow names sometimes. All siblings do not commit identity fraud. Her story might have worked once, but people had watched her operate for years. The only thing her meltdown revealed was that her reputation had been held together by other people's silence, and mine was no longer part of the glue. The extended family didn't take her side. They didn't take mine either. They simply went quiet. And quiet was fatal to someone who lived on applause. My mother tried her own version of damage control. She didn't call me, didn't text, didn't apologize. Instead, she wrote a family-wide email titled, "Family is Everything." No names, no accountability, just vague biblical references and sentimental platitudes about forgiveness, unity, and how the enemy loves to divide blood. I read it, deleted it, and felt absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, I moved with purpose. I removed myself from the shared property registry I'd had with my father, a small parcel of land he'd pressured me to sign on to years ago under the guise of keeping assets in the family. I sold my stake quietly, redirected every dollar into Ryan's company. We restructured the business formally. Co-founders, equal voting rights, clean cap table. We brought on 2 additional developers, each handpicked for stability rather than flash. We opened a shared office downtown, modest, but ours. The kind of space where ideas could grow without anyone asking permission. Ryan transitioned to operations full-time. His daughter started school with a savings account behind her name that I funded quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. While all this was happening, Michelle moved back into my parents' house. My cousin Allison told me, "Your mom says she's just taking some time to regroup," she whispered over lattes one afternoon. Regrouping. In their house, in her old bedroom. The same room she once treated like a throne while the rest of us hovered around like courtiers. Ryan heard that Michelle's 2 former partners were planning their own lawsuit. Her firm's ethics review remained open. Her Florida property continued bleeding money. And my mother, ever loyal to the image, not the truth, kept telling neighbors that Michelle had stepped back to explore new opportunities. They didn't sound like people ready to change. They sounded like people desperate to maintain a cringe-inducing version of the story. Invitations kept arriving. Family barbecues, birthday dinners, a random "we miss you, sweetie" card with no signature and a printed message. They weren't trying to reconnect. They were trying to reset the narrative without acknowledging their part. But I wasn't the girl who swallowed every slight anymore. And silence, my silence, was no longer submission. It was separation. One night, after a long day discussing distribution contracts with Ryan and onboarding one of our new developers, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and finally admitted the truth I'd been circling. They did not lose access to my money. They lost access to me, and they realized it far too late. They had depended on my invisible labor for years, not just financially, but emotionally. They'd mistaken my quiet for emptiness. They thought the middle child who never demanded applause would always be available for extraction. But removing myself from their script didn't break me. It broke the story they were trying to keep alive. And without me holding up the scaffolding, their hierarchy collapsed in silence. Stop. Part 5. 6 months passed without a single word exchanged. Not a call, not a visit, not one forced holiday message, nothing. Just peace. The kind of peace you don't realize you were starving for until it finally arrives and fills every quiet corner of your life. During those 6 months, my life didn't explode into cinematic triumph or some glossy magazine version of success. It did something better. It became steady, clean, mine. Ryan and I were seated in our new shared office almost every day. 2 mismatched desks pushed against opposite walls, a whiteboard that never stayed clean longer than an hour, the soft clatter of keyboards, the occasional baby giggle from his daughter when his wife stopped by. We finalized terms with a new distribution partner that Friday, our first major contract. Not life-changing money, but real, sustainable, the kind of win that's earned molecule by molecule. Adrian came by after work that night, leaning in the doorway with dinner containers in hand, and that smile he saved just for me, the one that made me feel seen without feeling examined. He slipped into my rhythm like he'd always belonged there, not overshadowing anything, not demanding space, just fitting. While the office buzzed with gentle chaos, an email notification blinked on my laptop. Subject line, "I made a mistake." It was from my father, The sender address was one I didn't have saved, probably intentional, probably a new account created for a message he didn't want on the family computer. I hesitated before clicking, not out of fear, out of clarity. It wasn't danger waiting inside that email. It was a test. I opened it. It wasn't long. My father has never been verbose unless he's giving directions or talking about old football games. It was 3 short paragraphs. He said he had been thinking a lot, that he realized he may have allowed certain things to go too far. He didn't name Michelle, or my mother, or the ways he'd stood by in silence while I was used, diminished, or treated like a safety net. He didn't apologize. Not really. Not directly. He wrote at the end, "Would you ever consider coming home for dinner?" I read it twice, then a third time, not because I was moved, but because of the strange emptiness it stirred in me. Coming home. Home. That place wasn't a house, it wasn't an address, and it definitely wasn't the people who had gambled my name without permission, undervalued my work, and loved a version of me that required my silence. That bridge hadn't burned in one night. It had rotted plank by plank. Dismissive comments, quiet insults, unpaid debts, fabricated signatures, rewritten stories, and decades of choosing comfort over accountability. By the time it collapsed, I was already across. So I closed the tab, not with anger, with certainty. That night, I had dinner with Ryan, his wife, and their daughter. Adrian came too, sleeves rolled up, helping Ryan chop vegetables while his niece toddled around with her plastic laptop, proudly announcing she was coding with Aunt Claire. The kitchen smelled like garlic and warm bread. Music played low from a speaker. Someone laughed. Someone burned the rolls. Someone teased someone else for it. No tension, no walking on eggshells, no competition, no shame. Just warmth. Just love that didn't need to be earned by martyrdom. The kind of home I didn't know I'd been searching for because I'd never seen it modeled, not once, in my parents' house. After dinner, we sat on the sagging couch in Ryan's living room, reviewing mock-ups for the next feature release. His daughter climbed into my lap and pressed her tiny fingers onto my keyboard, making nonsense strings of characters that she proudly declared were code. Adrian watched me with this soft expression that made heat bloom in my chest, a look that said he saw me, not the role I used to play, not the silence I used to hide behind, not the scaffolding I used to hold up, but me, fully, finally. That's when it hit me, really hit me. My success didn't look like Michelle's polished bragging rights or my mother's approval metrics. It wasn't a courtroom title or a law firm merger or a name drop at a dinner party. My success was quieter. It lived in things that grew, things I built, people I chose, people who chose me back, found family over blood fault lines. I wasn't chasing their version of success. I was funding a life they never deserved to be part of. And when my mother said, "You'll never be as successful as your sister," she had accidentally been right, just not in the way she meant, because she was measuring a life I had already stopped wanting. I wasn't trying to be Michelle. I was trying to be free. And I was, completely. When I left their dinner table that night, all those months ago, I didn't know what would happen, just that something had shifted. Now, sitting with the only people who had ever truly been in my corner, I finally understood the shift. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even closure. It was clarity, the kind you don't walk back from. And I never would.